So, as many of you may know, today is the final day for our theme around abundance. And a lot of times with abundance, we talk about giving. What I want to focus on, that abundance is that process of giving and receiving. That's the pathway, that it's both giving and receiving. But I know for myself, and so I'm going to talk about me, but you can see if any of what I say about me refers to you. I know that my relationship with receiving is a messed up one. If I were to create a continuum of the ease of giving and the ease of receiving, where can you imagine yourself in terms of where is it easiest? If this is the giving side and this is the receiving side, where would you fall along the continuum of ease in terms of giving and receiving? So Charlie is pointing me here, and this is very much where I lived. I lived in the land that was far easier, and I got a lot of messages about how it's better to give than it is to receive. And I'm seeing some nods there. So there's this notion that one is better than the other, but the matter of the fact is that we have to both give and receive. If we're not doing that, then we're really not alive. As a case in point, I invite everyone to take a deep breath in. Now hold it. Now we have just received. Now give. Breathe it out. And just keep breathing out. Can you keep breathing out? How long can you keep breathing out? Isn't there a point where the giving out, that giving back into the universe, it just has to stop? We cannot keep giving. Nor can we keep receiving. We're not designed for one or the other. We're designed to be this dynamic of doing it both. So if you want to move to that next, or that next slide. So the breath in and the breath out is a great illustration about what it means to be alive in this abundant giving and receiving universe. We can come back to that understanding about giving and receiving with the simple act of breathing in and breathing out. This does not have to be complicated. We do not have to make this difficult. It's as simple as stopping and even noticing, where am I in my breath cycle? Am I in the middle of breathing out? Am I in the middle of breathing in? Am I even aware that I can think about it and notice it? The act of becoming an abundant person is that act of consciousness. It's that act of pausing and noticing and deciding where we are with that. We can move to the next picture. And I just have this as an illustration. Here are these young people, and they're just, none of them have to think about breathing or breathing out or breathing in order to be healthy and whole and complete. It's something that is just natural. And how easy is it for us to lose our sense of what's natural? In terms of that breathing out and breathing in. Really, that's the first thing that I want us to take away as our lesson this week. That we have to do both. I think I've talked about this before, but the way that they used to catch monkeys in Africa is they would set up cages with a little banana or fruit inside of the cage. And the monkey would have to put their hand in the cage in order to get the banana or the fruit. And once their hand was in the cage, the persons knew they had it because the animal would not let go. The hand was too big to get back out. The hand could get in perfectly fine, but the hand could not get back out as long as that monkey kept gripping on to the banana or gripping onto the fruit. How many of us are like the monkey, caught in those traps? There are so many traps out there. How easy is it for 1995 a month? You could have this.
No.
Oh.
Yeah. Our hand is on that thing. And my God, do we really want to cancel that? It's so great. Think of all we're getting from it.
And you can get two if you do it.
And you act now, just extra shipping and handling. Shipping and handling. So how often do we get ourselves trapped with that process? To be alive is to be able to let go. To let ourselves see, oh my gosh, I'm trapped by this thing. Woe is me. How often do we as a people engage in that woe is me story? It can be very, very difficult to let go of that woe is me story.
Mm-hmm.
How often does our identity become that woe is me story? I won't say about any of you, I see laughter, but I know that for many, many years, my stories of difficulty were how I named my identity. Mykal gave that reading today, and I want to link it to, was very specific about choosing that reading in the midst of abundance, because Howard Thurman was someone who intimately knew what it was like to have life be hateful towards him. But what Howard Thurman also realized is that there were people who were haters, and that rather than dismissing them, he had a deep and caring and compassionate understanding about what drove them. With respect to that person who shot all those people in the synagogue, a 97-year-old died. The person survived the Holocaust to be shot by a white supremacist here in this country. What is it like to be living in these times where the very process that the 97-year-old went through is being rekindled and recreated? That hatred is being promulgated, it's being advanced, it's being idolized. And like Howard Thurman identified, hatred gathers a unique, horrible kind of energy. For years I've been wondering, what is the compelling interest in zombies? Is anyone in this room not heard of zombies? Zombies are an essential element of our culture nowadays, and I think the reason is this, that hatred is that zombie culture. That the zombies represent the kind of hatred that just goes on mindlessly. Zombies are not known for their mindfulness.
It wants to eat brains. It wants you or not.
It wants brains, but it's taking brains away. It's never like the zombies gain brainfulness from their brain consumption. You know, you hear the expression, you are what you eat. That's not the case for zombies. That does not improve their ability to move through and be in the world. The story of the zombies, I think that it really does resonate today, because at a level, we are aware that we are in this powerful environment that is filled with hate.
Are you going to be here next week?
That is this zombie promoting thing. So we're having to pause.
Yeah. Just saying goodbye.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for being here.
Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Bye.
Different love.
Absolutely.
Sneak out on a regular time, but if we're not going to see you for months, we gotta say goodbye.
Here, please. Peace out. So amazing.
Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. The other stories that are connected that are like the zombies are. Does anybody remember the Blob?
Yes.
Yeah.
DJ.
The song, yeah.
Yeah. Steve McQueen's first movie. Oh,
Oh.
Oh, that's right.
yeah. Steve McQueen's first movie. Did you watch a lot? He had a fair amount of lines in the Blob. What happens with the Blob? What happens in the zombies? There's a mindlessness that happens. The Blob just becomes this bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger force. I don't know about you, but I know for myself that I sometimes feel that I'm up against the Blob in terms of I can speak what seems very reasonable. I can come up and I can reason. You know, I was talking with Sherry a little bit earlier about how there appears to be a lack of critical thinking in our world today. You know, people say there was a comment by a certain highly elected figure, and the person was questioned, what do you think about how guns and the presence and the easy access to guns is contributing to this? Well, you know, if they had proper security inside of the synagogue, none of that would have happened.
Can you imagine?
And the police handled themselves beautifully. That's fine. What about better, more responsible ways of dealing with guns? Oh, the police handled themselves really responsibly. It's just there's no connection between thought A and response.
Right.
And I don't know about you, but there are people that I've talked with that I can have a reasoned argument and they're coming completely from another domain.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
they have not heard in the slightest what I put out there. So how do we be recipients in this realm of hatred? I think this is a really important question because do we get caught in a cycle of hatred? Do we become hateful? Do we become bitter? Do we become angry? Do we get drawn into the very force that we seem to be up against? And the tradition that I want to hearken back to is the Hebraic prophets. The Hebrew prophets, the prophets of Israel, came forward and said, "We have fallen off the path." Now the prophets weren't people that people looked up to and said, "Dude, oh, it is so cool you are speaking and that you are preaching the truth. Oh, wow, this is awesome. I am so impressed that you have the courage to come forward like this." No. The prophets spoke and people were like, la 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 la. I'm not hearing you. And oftentimes doesn't that seem that what we're up against? That we're saying this and it's la 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 la, fake news, la 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 la. My invitation is, how do we take the courage to become a prophet? Now you all know the story of Jonah.
No.
We might receive a gift, and how often are we wanting to really receive it that this is wrong and I need to speak up against it? Jonah was saying, I'm not doing that. I'm not going there. Nineveh is not the happy place. I do not, it's not a big, happy Jewish settlement. I'm not really thinking it's a good place for me. So, Spirit had told Jonah, go to Nineveh. And Jonah was, maybe no. Maybe, not maybe, absolutely no. And the thing was that every time that Jonah tried to get out of going there, he gets on a ship headed the exact opposite direction. And what happens? A storm hits that ship. And the sailors are all trying to figure out what is different. One of these things is not like the other. We have done this trip many, many times, and the only thing that's different is that Jonah dude. And he's the one that's cowering down there below. He knows something about this storm. They threw him off, and suddenly that storm is gone. They threw him out the boat. They knew that this guy was running from something. Jonah's like, well, at least I'm in the water. I can't be getting to Nineveh this way, when he gets swallowed by the whale. Now you would think this would be the end of Jonah. No, no, no. The whale takes him, delivers him on the shores of Nineveh. It's like, oh. That call to prophecy, it was not a gift that he was ready to receive. How many of us sometimes find ourselves in those Jonah shoes?
Oh, yeah.
I do not want to receive this gift. My noticing this injustice, this might just be something wrong with me, and I'd like to lay low, and I'd like to not pay attention to it. So like I said, for number one, it's about that breathing in, the breathing out. Number two is that sometimes the gift that we must receive is something that challenges us to our very core. What I would propose, and again, why I have this picture is, you see that's a group of people. I was originally going to have someone meditating in the forest, and then I realized this is much better, because this is a community of people. People have done things together. Sometimes when we are challenged, the way to get through that challenge is to come together in community. Sometimes it's that finding another who will support us. How often have we come up against someone who is completely the other direction? That's not the place where we're going to be getting encouraged and getting our strokes. That's not the place where someone's going to be saying, I think that's a really good idea. I think you should speak up. One of the things that I'm pleased to announce, the Seattle School District has made a really powerful commitment towards, the term is ending the opportunity gap. Ending disproportionality. There's a huge disproportionality in terms of how little brown boys get treated in the system from preschool on up. If they can get up past 8th grade, it's lucky. I mean, the proportion of brown boys that get through and graduate is small in relation to other groups. And the Seattle School District has noticed this and has made a commitment to have this stop. One of the ways that they've committed to this is the development of racial equity teams, so that schools can be looking at what are we doing in our own place? How do we stop this? Now I have to tell you, these racial equity groups are not like comfortable, happy places. What I'm pleased to announce is that at the bargaining this summer, the person that was talking about it mentioned it can be for buildings or programs. And a little light bulb went off, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm in a program, I'm not in a building, I'm in a program. What if my program were to do this? So I ran over to my program director, and I'm like, what would you think about this? And my program director was like, oh, that's a great idea. And I found other people that were willing to participate. And so we wrote an application, and we were one of 26 places, schools and a program, that put in an application to become a racial equity team this year.
So it's optional.
Oh, it's optional, but it's an application. We have 105 schools, 26 applied for this year. October 2nd, I heard that they had narrowed it down. They had cut out 13. We hadn't heard anything back, so that was good. That meant that we were still in the running. And on Monday this week, I heard that we were selected as finalists. We get to become a racial equity team.
That's over 10% of the schools. That's outrageously cool. Yeah.
So I bring that forward because there's a group that is saying, yes, we will do this prophetic work. We will take this on and we will figure out how to do it in a different way, because it's different when you're a school versus being across the whole district. So it's finding who in my program is interested. Who in my program wants to do this? Who wants to move this work forward? And I use this again as an example to be able to look, where are we already making connections? Where is it that we are doing the work that we are prophetically called to do. Maybe it is signing a petition. Maybe it is calling people up or texting or talking with them and saying, did you vote? Have you voted? Have you voted yet? Take on that prophetic voice. Take on that prophetic gift. So, now we can move to the next. This is something a little bit adapted from Earnest Holmes. Spirit is life, and life gives itself to us. It gives all of itself. The gift without a receiver cannot complete itself. So I'm going to invite us to say that affirmation together. Spirit is life, and life gives itself to us. It gives all of itself. The gift without a receiver cannot complete itself. Let's do that 2 more times. Spirit is life, and life gives itself to us. It gives all of itself. The gift without a receiver cannot complete itself. One more time. Spirit is life, and life gives itself to us. It gives all of itself. The gift without a receiver cannot complete itself. I talked earlier at the beginning about that notion of it being easier to be a giver than to be a receiver. I think the call of the prophet can give one example of why it's easy. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, I want to tell you a little story. There are 4 nuns in the convent, and the convent gets consumed in flames. And 4 of these nuns are on the top floor of the convent. And they are looking around wondering, how are we going to get out? How are we going to get out? And one of the nuns says, well, we've got our habits. So they tie their 4 habits together, and their habits are enough that they form a rope, and they make their way down from the top of the building. And the fire people are like, how is it that you could do this? What was it? And they said, we had complete faith. We also know that old habits are impossible to break. How many of us have old habits that feel impossible to break? How many of us have devised old habits for getting out of what feel like burning buildings? How many of us have come up with ways to deal with giving and receiving as a coping mechanism? I'd like us to take just a couple of moments and to imagine a key moment, a key time where we made a decision about giving and receiving. And when you've got that moment, just kind of give a little bit of a nod or a little thumbs up that you're there about that habit. Talked about this before, but one of my aha moments. My father had started a business, but he had started it with an unscrupulous partner, and his partner had signed a contract with their previous employer, promising never to do competition with their previous employer, and what they were doing was competing with their previous employer. So their previous employer sued my dad and his partner, but his partner had conveniently moved out of state, so the suit could no longer go after the partner who had signed the contract. But my dad, and I don't know if any of you know what you know about partnerships, but the partner is equally responsible for whatever the other one did. So even though my dad's understanding was not all that sophisticated at the time, so he was like, I should be fine because I never signed that contract. And also my dad didn't have a particularly witted attorney. So my dad's attorney was receiving all of these notices from the suing agent, basically depositions. And if you don't respond to it, it gets entered into the court records as truth. So all of these things had come through, and my dad's attorney's like, oh, you don't have to worry about it, don't have to worry about it, don't have to worry about it. So there was really no case, because when it came time, my dad's word in response to that was meaningless, because the time had lapsed when he could counter what it is that they were arguing for.
Oh my God.
I give this context because as a result, my dad lost everything.
Oh.
So the sheriff showed up at our home with a court order to remove the stuff. So that, the sheriff is taking the furniture out of the house. My grandmother, who had been through lawsuits herself, had learned, you keep every piece of paper you have. So my grandmother, she ran upstairs and she opened up her trunk full of receipts, and she's like, you're not taking that, that's mine. And you're not taking that, that's mine. And you're not taking that, that's mine. My grandmother had kept every single receipt. So every piece of furniture that was a gift or that my grandmother had, they were like, nope, they couldn't take any of that stuff. But the consequence of that, my grandmother was pretty smart and figured out a way around the solution. But we didn't have money, because when you're bankrupt, you're not supposed to have money. So we had a period of time where my dad's little business had two items. It had a typewriter and it had a tape recorder. So for Christmas, I would receive the typewriter and my sister would receive the tape recorder. And then it was birthday time, I would receive the tape recorder, and it was when my sister's birthday time, she would receive the typewriter. So we kept getting promissory notes for those two same items. Now my sister was figured it out. She was smarter than I was. My sister just went and got herself her own. She got herself her own. I learned not to continue to want. I learned to let go of. So it taught me the way to cope with things, and that also contributed to my notion. I'm going to be a priest, and many of you may know that within the Catholic Church, the priestly lot is a vow of poverty.
Yeah.
That was the decision I made about coping. That it's okay to be poor because I'm being poor for God. How many of us establish habits rooted in not necessarily informed thinking? I use myself as an illustration. The other thing is, the gifts that come out of that kind of thing are, I can certainly receive the gift of bills. If you charge something, you get bills. So I have an abundance of bills. So I learned that abundance can show up in all kinds of ways. And is that really the way that I want to be a receiver? A receiver of all of these bills? Let's trace back what our habits are. Where did they get started? Part of that is psychological review, which I think can be important because it can shine a light on habits. And knowing where a habit came from can start to give us some power over it. If that didn't, then Tay wouldn't have a job.
That's right.
One of her works as a therapist is helping people who come to the aha, there's something happening in my life that's completely miserable. I don't want to be experiencing this complete misery. And I heard that counseling is a way to set down my complete misery. There's also a spiritual way with the spiritual practices. Where do we focus our attention? The law of attraction. Do we focus our attention on those stories about our need? We may not be even aware that we're doing it, but we look at what the results in our life are and we start to see that. The other piece, though, is to be looking at the larger society. Again, that's where I call us back to our prophetic mission. We live in a society that is very, 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 very happy to have us be consumers.
Right.
You know, if you don't have X, Y, or Z, you are incomplete. You know, how many times do we live in a place where we can feel judged if we do something that doesn't fit in with the norm? What I'm going to invite in terms of a spiritual practice is to spend at least this week, if not the rest of our lives, noticing what gets offered to us, greeting it with openness and gratitude. We get to choose to be conscious graders. I've told this story before, but I think it connects with this point here. Rumi talked about our lives, that we are like a house, and that we can invite whoever comes in. And in the story he tells about how bitterness and anger and resentment come waltzing through the house, stamping on all of the furniture, destroying it. But Rumi doesn't advise in the poem to slam the door against them. He says to invite them in, to sweep out all that they've destroyed so that there's room to dance. How do we make ourselves a presence of dance and celebration? How do we make ourselves, in the face of the violence, how do we say that I am going to hold to a response of loving kindness? How do we hold a part of our hearts that that person who could do that kind of action is a wounded being? How do we be present to their woundedness, but not in a way that covers up taking responsibility for what it is that their actions